You picked the right healthcare roundtable discussion to listen in on, because
I did.
I think the topic of discussion is going to be particularly interesting to GovCon organizations that are selling products and services to the government, where the government is interested more and more in using blockchain technology, using innovation technology. But in a lot of the task orders, a lot of the RFIs, even some of the RFPs that I've been hearing about that are dropping from agencies, they're really interested in blockchain. And the way to promote that interest is to make them comfortable that blockchain solutions are not dangerous, they're very mysterious, but that's kind of what this conversation is all about. All right, we're going to get started. It's 7 minutes past the hour. We've got a small contingent here. Welcome, everybody. My friend Mark Luther, I see you joined. Dante, how are you? Some folks that haven't had the opportunity to meet personally yet, and that's great. Thanks for joining. The Healthcare Working Group from the Government Blockchain Association hosts this Healthcare Roundtable every third Thursday of the month. My name is Marquis Allen. I lead the Healthcare Working Group. I'm also the CEO of Clinical Squared. We're a software development company that works in the blockchain space. Couple of announcements that I wanted to start off with, just in the spirit of keeping everybody informed. The Government Blockchain Association has some really good connections and collaborative efforts with other industry associations out, especially that are related to healthcare. The Health Information Management Systems Society, HIMSS, is one of them. So anybody that's on this call that's familiar with HIMSS, there is a blockchain task force that HIMSS hosts monthly, where HIMSS members can contribute to their ideation process around blockchain solutions, healthcare-centric blockchain applications that are trying to get a foothold, that are demonstrating use case. Jorge Ferrer, my good friend, who's not on this call, is one of the chairs of that effort. And so I am going to drop his LinkedIn information in the chat, along with the LinkedIn page for HIMSS. Again, we do this in the spirit of collaboration and as a public service to kind of further the cause of blockchain technology. Another one of the organizations that the GBA is affiliated with, we have some close collaborations with them, is ACT-IAC. That's the American Council for Technology, the Industry Association, Industry Advisory Council. Sorry, I got my A's confused. Our good friend, and he's also a GBA member, Josh Hakakian, is the chairperson for the ACT-IAC Blockchain Working Group, and they meet weekly. I'm going to drop Josh's contact information on LinkedIn into the chat. So anybody who wants to reach out to him, and I'll also put a note that he is the ACT-IAC Blockchain Task Force Chair, so that you have context. And feel free to reach out to those organizations as well. I'm thinking that everybody that's on this call is here because you're interested in the technology, you're interested in learning about the technology, and those of you that have some depth of knowledge and understanding of how it can be applied for healthcare or for whatever other vertical. I'm thinking that you guys are all interested in furthering that, no matter who the association, who the organization, the cohort is. So feel free to connect with them. All right, two more really quick announcements. The Government Blockchain Association is hosting yet another magnificent symposium in September. It's titled the Blockchain and it's a conference on blockchain and infrastructure. I'm going to drop another link in the chat for the GBA page that gives details about speakers, the timing, what the topics are going to be about. And Gerard, actually, this would be a good opportunity for you to just say a couple of words about the blockchain and infrastructure symposium coming up September 28th, I think it is, it starts, 28th through the 30th.
29th and 30th. Am I sharing the screen right now?
Yes.
Okay.
You can see your screen.
All right. Well, I tell you what, Marquis, is it okay if I just talk a little bit about GBA and then move directly into the conference? And then I can start moving into BMF. So you just want to kind of walk them through kind of what the expectation, what the agenda is, and then I'll just take it from there.
Well, before we do that, then we'll tee you up, because I also wanted to introduce my co-moderator, Aaron Cohn. He is another mainstay with the Healthcare Working Group. He helps mightily with the planning and execution of some of the projects that the Healthcare Working Group works on. And so he'll kind of give you an intro briefly. But before we do, I'm also going to drop yet another link in the chat for the GBA page that details information about the Healthcare Working Group. We work on different projects as a group that hopefully spur conversation and inclusion of technologists, people in healthcare that are interested in innovation in the space. And we've been working on several projects to kind of promote blockchain and give guidance and information about blockchain as a technology to the public. So I just dropped that link in the chat. Aaron, good morning. I know you're on the West Coast. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll let you kind of take it from here and just frame out the rules. And we've got a pretty small contingency here, less than well, we've got about 18 people. It's a few people. I can't count. But I'll let you kind of introduce Gerard, and then Gerard, if you don't mind, you can give a quick synopsis about the GBA, a snippet about the blockchain and infrastructure conference coming up, and then we're really interested in the topic that Aaron's going to introduce you for.
Yep. Thanks, Marquis, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to be kicking it over to Gerard. He's going to be discussing the blockchain maturity model today. The one thing to point out before he gets started, if you guys have questions throughout the presentation, just go ahead and drop those in the chat, and I will grab Gerard's attention and make sure all the questions in there get answered. So with that being said, I'll kick it over to you, Gerard, and you can get started.
All right, thanks. Well, thanks, Marquis. Thanks, Aaron, and all you guys for coming on board. The exciting part about this conversation is we're going to talk about the blockchain maturity model, but then we're going to get really specific in terms of healthcare issues, and the second part of this is really intended to be a collaboration. So really excited. Let me tell you a little bit about the GBA as an organization first, because I think it's important to understand how all the different parts of GBA fit together. The BMM has become somewhat of a central nervous system for the entire organization. So the Government Blockchain Association is a membership organization. We have working groups, chapters, we have events, we do all the kinds of things that most associations do. The difference is, I think, we actually put out a lot of operational product. So, for example, in terms of who's involved in the GBA has members in about 500 different government offices around the world. And the goal is to really create a fabric between the public and the private sector so that they can connect, communicate, and collaborate, right? And so we don't typically have relationships with governments themselves, but we have relationships with people in governments. And the goal really is, a lot of governments want to move. The problem is that most government processes are very slow, right? The whole RFP process. So what we want to do is get folks in government connected with industry leaders in more informal settings, so they can have conversations, they can work through things, and our members can even help the folks in government, help develop the statement of work and really be able to move forward in a very sort of collaborative way. And so we have members in local, state, national, and international governments, literally all over the world. You guys are seeing the screen with all the logos, correct?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, good. Yeah, and then we're doing a lot of stuff in the Middle East. In fact, we just got our first large organizational member. We're finalizing that deal in Saudi Arabia. What's interesting is that they want to start building out Islamic banking supplement requirements to the BMM. So we're talking with folks in Mexico and the United Nations, and so it's unlike some of the other associations that are very U.S. centric. The GBA is clearly very globally centric. Some of the ways that we help people connect, communicate, and collaborate is through all kinds of weekly and monthly meetings like this one. We've got the healthcare roundtable listed here, but folks get together to talk about just all kinds of different topics. And if you want to see sort of a summary of what that looks like, GBA has a YouTube channel. We've got about 1,400 subscribers at this point. We've finally gotten to the point where it's actually now growing on its own. So initially we had to put a lot of effort into growing it. But we've got incredible. We've got the ambassador from El Salvador talking about how their experiences with Bitcoin. Former members, chairs of the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee. He was basically responsible for every dollar that the U.S. spent. Charles Hoskinson, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, his token is worth about $80 billion, or at least it was the last time I looked at it. This guy's great, Scott Sternetta. He actually put the very first blockchain into production in 1991. And if you read the Satoshi white paper, 3 of the 8 references of that white paper belong to Scott. Anyway, a tremendous amount of information. This site is being regarded by folks in government around the world as being sort of the authoritative source for where you go for a government and blockchain solution. This guy is the vice chair of the National Credit Union Administration and is working with GBA to build the very first 100% blockchain-based credit union. So tremendous knowledge, expertise, globally recognized. I mean, I wish I could tell you about so many people here. I just don't have the time to do that. The conference that we're doing on September 29th and September 30th focuses on blockchain and infrastructure. We would love for you guys to participate in this. By all means, get your tickets now. It's free for anybody in government. Just tell you about a couple of our keynotes. Brian Kavanaugh just stepped down from federal service. He was a member of the National Security Council for both Presidents Trump and Presidents Biden, focusing on resilience policy. Dino is a CIO at the United Nations. He actually leads a digital transformation working group for the entire United Nations. And in that, he coordinates the efforts of the CIOs for the World Food Program, the World Health Organization, about 30 different UN programs. Dino is the facilitator for. And just to give you an example, our funding blockchain projects panel, Bill Rockwood has written more legislation to fund blockchain projects than anybody else in Congress. Vilma has invested in over 60 different blockchain projects. Just one of the ones she co-founded is worth $2.5 billion. Dr. Barry Johnson, he's the guy that hands out the SBIR grants for the National Science Foundation. And Dr. Ingrid Vesely-Feltes is she's the national director for the U.S. office of the World Business Angel Investment Forum. And their goal is to get essentially the G20 investors, funds and investments into startups. So we got folks from NASA. I mean, it's really a star-studded panel. We do have a healthcare panel that is led by our dear friend Heather Flannery, who I can't tell you enough, and you guys know most of these people, Pradeep and Frank and Ellen. So just incredible folks. All right, so we definitely want you guys to participate in that. All right, let's talk a little bit about the BMM. But before I do, it's important to understand that the BMM is a work product of one of the GBA working groups. And so GBA has over 50 different working groups. And so what we're going to talk about is the product of just one of those working groups. And so we get the science, health, and tech working groups, digital economy, and then we have governance, legal, regulatory, compliance working groups, and the standards and certifications working group is just one of the GBA working groups. But the reason why this is important, which we're going to talk about shortly, is the supplemental requirements. So each of the working groups, including the healthcare working group, is going to be asked to come up with supplemental requirements. And I wish I could tell you about the folks. So the members of this working group are geographically dispersed all over the world. They represent many different technologies. We've got folks that are involved in DeFi. We've got folks that are building technologies. We've got this crazy guy named Marquis Allen. But it represents technologies. There are many different types of blockchains, right? There are some blockchains that have no blocks. There's blockchains that don't use consensus mechanisms. They use other mechanisms for synchronization. There's permission, there's public. So when we built the BMM, the perspectives of the people that built it include everything from ISO auditors, all sorts of different auditors, government leaders, business leaders, technologists. So the model was actually built by a very diverse group of people that didn't just focus on US or local, national, international, different technologies, different use cases. So it was just a very diverse group of people in the public and private sector. So what's the itch that the BMM is trying to scratch? Right? Governments around the world are preparing to acquire blockchain solutions. The problem is they don't have the knowledge of the framework to be able to assess a good one from a bad one. And what's happened in a lot of cases is people came up with a great idea. They put together some marketing materials, right? They got a whole bunch of funding, right? Millions of dollars got poured into it. And then they just started building code without really a whole lot of design or not really doing it the way a mature enterprise solution provider would do, right? And so a lot of them crashed and they got a bad name. And if you look at many of the blockchain projects, the last time I looked at it, it was like, I don't know, 85, 90% of those blockchain projects failed because they really did not do the due diligence and build their solution in a way that was sort of mature. So to help our members basically differentiate their high quality solutions from all the hype, right, we build a blockchain maturity model. And what the blockchain maturity model does is the audiences that it really helps is there's 4 audiences. There are government acquisition professionals, and so we've been reviewing this with folks at different states, at the national government, the GSA, different organizations that are just thrilled with it. But it helps acquisition professionals be able to set some criteria so that they can choose somebody, and not worry about getting fired for it. It also helps government contractors because it now gives them a pathway of these are the things that we need to do to be able to demonstrate a mature solution. And then it helps investors. Basically, when we got input for building the models, one of the folks we went to the investor community and said, hey, when you're assessing a startup, right, to determine whether you're going to invest in, what are the things that are important to you? And so from an investor and startup perspective, it helps the startups know what the investors are looking for. It helps the investors basically save a lot of time and energy because they know that that assessment, that potential project has been independently assessed by a third party. So when we go down and we look at the components, let me see if I can increase the size of this a little bit. All right. Oh, that's a little too big. All right. These are the different areas that the model looks at, right? Distribution, infrastructure, sustainability, governance, identity management, interoperability, performance, privacy, reliability, resilience, security, and synchronization. This synchronization was originally consensus, but what we realized was, to our surprise, there are a lot of blockchain solutions that use something other than consensus to synchronize the network. And I'll tell you another sort of interesting tidbit. Distribution, at one point it was immutability, and another it was decentralization. And what we finally realized is distribution was the mechanism that allowed those other things to happen. So, and then for each of those elements, we evaluated along 5 levels. And we're trying to answer the questions, is this solution mature enough? Is this idea mature enough to warrant research and development funds? Is it mature enough to be a proof of concept? Is it mature enough to be deployed in a production environment? Is it mature enough to be rolled out into an enterprise environment? Is it mature enough to be rolled out globally? And these are the kinds of questions that the different levels basically allow. So each of the elements, you can think of them as perspectives, right? Characteristics of a blockchain solution. Each of them are evaluated along the 5 levels. In order to achieve a blockchain maturity model level, it's basically the lowest common denominator across all 11 tiers. Now, in addition to the core requirements, there are domain-specific requirements, and here's why. Let's take identity management as an idea, right? Identity management looks very different in different domains or contexts. So, for example, if you're going to build a financial management system, clearly you have to do anti-money laundering, know your customer requirements, right? Clearly you have to have very, very tight knowledge of who's making which financial transactions. But if you're doing a voting or election system, you absolutely need to have permanent separability between the voter and the vote. If you're doing, say, a clinical trials solution, right? You need to know that this data came from patient ABC 123. You just can't know ABC's 123's name, address, and phone number, right? So each of these expectations require different nuances. So we've asked all of the working groups, right? The reason I come back to here, if I still have it up, I don't have it up anymore. The reason we go to the working groups is we say, hey, can you take a look at these core elements? And for a healthcare solution, what's unique about a healthcare solution that's not in the core requirements? Because when you're creating a model or a standard, right, there's an inverse relationship between the specificity, right? The specificity and the value are uniquely combined, right? But the applicability or the scope, right? So it is sort of the opposite. It's because the more specific it is, the higher the value, but unfortunately, the fewer solutions will be able to be in scope. But if you create something with a very wide scope, then it's more general in nature, and the value decreases, right? So the way that we deal with that is creating domain-specific requirements. And as an example, and this is one of the things that we're going to, in a few minutes, come back and talk to the healthcare working group about is, what are the things unique to healthcare? So I'll come back to that in a minute. So
well, Gerard, actually, if I could get you to take a breath for a second, I had a question. If you go back up just a little bit to the 5 levels of assessment, the functional levels that you've identified. Yes, that's right. Can you describe how these functional levels are assessed? What is meant by the initial functional level?
Sure. So at the initial level, the idea is for an initial level, it's fairly easy to get a rating, right? If you've got a decent idea, you've got something documented, it's fairly easy. I'll open up the standard in a second and give you some examples. For level 2, there's an expectation that there's something called a solution documentation package. So the model does not define exactly how you have to have it formatted or organized, but it does identify minimum expectation, what should be in there. So for example, if you're interfacing with other systems, you have to have interface system descriptions. You've got to identify from a distribution perspective. There's certain expectations. If your whole blockchain is on a single cloud provider, right, under the control of a single CTO, that means that cloud provider could come in one morning and turn off the switch. Then that's not quite acceptable, right? And that concept is really about distributing the risk from being homogeneous to being heterogeneous in terms of your distribution. But at level 2, for each of the elements, there's a set of, okay, you must document these things. Validated is really all about basically doing proof of concepts, proving out that the claims that you're making are in fact true. Production is really about, making sure that the thing works. And then optimizing is really about about basically having mechanisms in place to do fault handling, capacity and availability management, different things like that. So we borrowed some stuff from CMMI, but at the same time, and my background is I spent 12 years as a CMMI as a CMMI lead assessor. Many of those years was as a high maturity lead assessor. So does that answer the question? I can go in and go into details.
I think it does. I think so. Just specifying that in the initial level of assessment, it's just as simple as someone who has a blockchain system that they want to be assessed presents that system to be assessed. That's part of the functional requirement, I suppose, for the first.
Well,
you've got a blockchain.
Download the BMM. Okay, so.
And then for the documented level of assessment, once that organization demonstrates, hey, they've got a product plan, they've got an execution plan for their trajectory of how they're going to build it out. If they have all of their architecture mapped out so that you can see, here we go, everything. This is valuable. Yeah.
So let me just get down. So for example, for distribution, right? The goal of distribution is to assess the hosting concentration risk from homogeneous to heterogeneous. The table below describes the requirements associated with each level. Level one, the solution is or will, because remember, this could be a white paper, this could be a proposal, right? You don't have to have a built solution. Will be on a distributed platform or is replicated using cloud or some related technologies. The solution is not on a single server or hardware component controlled by a single person or entity. So if you have a white paper that says this is how we're going to do it, and it's not going to be under the single control of a single source, then you pass initial, right? However, at level two, a solution documentation package shall address how the system shall be designed to write and read data to a distributed system wherein control is distributed among a person or organizations participating in the operation of that system, right? At level three, no single person or entity may have administrative control of the hardware for more than 50% of the nodes. This includes nodes hosted on the same cloud provider. The administrative control of hardware shall be with a person or legal entity that exists in the jurisdiction of more than one city.
So let me stop you there. Let me ask another question. So the differentiation between a centralized blockchain, because there's certainly a place in this great big world for people that want the features, the functionality of a blockchain, but they still want to keep it sequestered. And then a decentralized model.
Well, hold on for a second.
Okay.
So when you say a centralized blockchain, right? Explain what you mean by a centralized blockchain.
So say an organization wants to just have a mechanism where they know that their internal documentation, their internal data is transacted safely, securely, maybe as a security mechanism for their enterprise, as opposed to a mechanism to share information with consumers. So say you have a multinational company that's spread out, all over the world, right? And these multinational companies more and more are subjected to phishing attacks, to different exploits where people come in and try to get their employees to give them the keys to the kingdom, right? A blockchain could, in a specific use case, be leveraged to provide encryption, to provide fault tolerance in the guise of redundancy, to thwart those kinds of vulnerabilities in their system. But they don't necessarily want to make it so that the data that they're transacting on is something that needs to be federated beyond their four walls.
So you're talking about a permission blockchain.
Yes, and so in the language that you
hold on. Let me cover sort of the difference between what you refer to as a centralized blockchain versus a permissioned blockchain. Okay. So a permissioned blockchain can can achieve any BMM level, no problem. But the term centralized blockchain to a degree is an oxymoron, right? And that is, if a single person, right, can make a change to the data without being observed or without being recognized by anybody else, then it's not a blockchain. It's basically just a centralized database. You got a centralized database administrator, they can do whatever they want to do. So if you have somebody who can do whatever they want to, you can't pass go, right? The thing about a blockchain is the data has to be immutable, right? And if anybody does make a change to corrupt the data, right, then it's immediately recognized by the other participants and it's rejected. But if you have a situation where you've got a single CTO that has, got authority over the blockchain or over the system, it's really not a blockchain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and actually, one of the participants, Zach Wiener, hey, thanks for joining today. Zach just kindly dropped a differentiation from CoinGeek in the chat for anybody who's interested in the difference between a private versus a public versus a permissioned blockchain. So yeah, your explanation, Gerard, it makes a lot of sense. And Zach, thanks for dropping that resource in the chat for everybody to kind of take a look at the differences of solution that the BMM can be leveraged to assess. I think that was really my overarching question, is making sure that there are mechanisms in the blockchain maturity model to consider blockchains that might not expressly be designed for a purely decentralized distribution of data. It's something that
let's be clear on terms, right? Because this is really, really, really important. So the folks who built this included Dino, who is at the United Nations, and they built their solution on Hyperledger, right? There's a permission. Listen, if permission is fine, right? Meaning, if I say I've got this solution, and I only want the nodes of my different, let's say, companies, right? I want my different companies to be node owners, and I don't want anybody outside of our enterprise to essentially be nodes. I can permission those nodes, right? And say, okay, you're in, and unless I give you permission to be part of the network, you can't participate, right? But those companies have to have independent control of those nodes, right? Meaning, if I can tunnel into those nodes and I can falsify data, right? That you got one guy who can basically create, can corrupt the system without anybody else knowing it, then really all you have is a database.
Right.
The most important thing from a blockchain perspective, right, is the issue of immutability, right, and trust. And so it has to be the solution. The more mature it is, the more uncorruptible it needs to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense to me. Does anybody on the roundtable have any interjections, any questions, any comments around what we've been discussing so far? Hearing none, I'd say proceed on. And Gerard, thank you for that kind of deeper dive. I think it's important for people to understand why the blockchain maturity model is important, and the level of depth that it goes to do the assessment. Mark Luther?
So,
Yes, sir.
yeah, sorry, I've got a request, if you don't mind, and thank you. So obviously we've got permission versus permissionless, and we've got a hybrid. So I'd love to for us to kind of go through a little bit about the hybrid side of things, how that works, and go through those conversations.
That's a great question. I have that same question as well.
Sure. Well, the hybrids essentially are really no different, right? So let's go through the requirements, right? So for level 3,
real quick, Gerard, I'm talking more about when you talk about you've got private keys, public keys. Let's go with the public keys. You've got a hybrid. Who's got access? Who doesn't?
Right. So that really is covered under governance. Let me see. So
just for clarification, for the purposes of this conversation, are we talking about at the node level or at any service provider level?
well, I'm going to address that right here, right?
Any-
So for
any
the
level.
governance, yeah, in fact, let me even back up a step. When we're talking about a blockchain solution, we're talking about the blockchain protocol. We're talking about the applications that are sitting on top of it. And we're also talking about the ecosystem around it. So this is different than, say, like an ISO 9000 certification, right? An ISO 9000 certification is an organizational certification, and it's not just a product standard. It really is a blend, because for a blockchain solution to work, it really needs both the underlying blockchain node network, the applications that run on top of it, and the ecosystem around it. So from a scope perspective. So when we look at a solution, as I just described from a governance perspective, the goal of governance in a blockchain solution is to provide the effective management of the key components, including assets, nodes, synchronization mechanisms, infrastructure, networks, systems, participants, protocols, records, and smart contracts, or lifecycle scripts. Governance may be performed by a variety of mechanisms, ranging from a centralized authority to one or more mutualized network agreements. The table below describes the requirements associated with each level. So at the initial level, you basically just have to define the roles and responsibilities, right, associated with controlling the different components of the solution. At level 2, a solution documentation package shall clearly clarify the process for governance of solutions. The process documents and or models shall include the following minimum criteria: how data is protected and governed, how decisions are made, and how errors and discrepancies are resolved, right? Because this is dealing with things like forks and other types of things like that, or basically any kind of inconsistencies in the network. The blockchain solution is governed by a group of people and or devices in accordance with the governance described in the solution documentation package. The solution documentation package shall state the applicable legal, regulatory, statutory, and intellectual property requirements. It also describes a plan to ensure the solution is consistent with those requirements, right? And level 4, governance of the blockchain is performed by adjusting resource allocations in response to blockchain performance and activity. The governance model includes the following activities: the governance rules and roles are established. Blockchain solution functions according to the rules and roles. The compliance and the efficacy are monitored, and rules and roles are modified to maintain the performance standards and expectations. So, and then at level 5, the blockchain is governed by a group of stakeholders that may be node operators, token holders, or users of the blockchain system.
So
we
plan,
really
do, check, and act. So it sounds like it sounds like the assessment model is basically: are you planning out your work? Are you working out your plan? Are you doing continuous process improvement? And are you acting on vulnerabilities or improvements that you see that can strengthen the solution for the use case that it's being applied to? Is that accurate?
that's absolutely accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Clarifying
Sure.
question?
Sure.
Mark, your first name is Mark, right? Or is it Luther Mark?
No, I'm Gerard.
Not you. The one who asked the question. I know
Mark
who.
Luther is, yeah, it's our good friend of the GBA.
So Mark, because you have 2 first names. But so I think when Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but your question was it more around the interconnectivity of how you would have public blockchain and a private blockchain working together?
Yes and no. I'll go more specific on that, and apologize for dogs barking. I'm in Ukraine right now. So I'm talking more around the data accessibility within a hybrid blockchain regarding geofencing and layer 1 and layer 2 solutions.
Right. So it would be, I mean, if I may, when you do your designs, because you have different systems, and these systems will have to connect in a way where you have access to the public pieces, but also protect your private pieces, because there's stuff in the public domain that you need. So it would be using the layer 1.
Correct.
Right.
There's things certain public doesn't need to know.
Exactly. But there's information out in the public that you would want, like maps. Let's use the,
Correct.
maps.
Correct.
Maps are public. But if I'm doing troop movements, I don't want you to know what I'm doing with those maps, right? So it would
No
be
comment.
Exactly.
right. So
Being in Ukraine.
it's important to pick the correct layer one that has that capability. So when you're building your layer twos and your layer threes for the connections that and the integrations, when you create that system of systems, you know that the interoperability pieces are there and you understand your permission. So the model is spot on with understanding who's on first and what's on second.
Right.
That's absolutely critical. That is a big piece of frustration in my
Correct. Third, fourth, and dugout as well.
yes.
And outfield, infield, defense, offense, you name it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember that? Well, I aged myself.
Yeah, and this ties into my good friend Adante Jones had asked a question about these kind of transactions where a company node has a blockchain internally that controls what the company puts out, but still wants to obfuscate proprietary information, or in the case that Delphine was mentioning, you know, if you're in the government space and you're dealing with intel of national security assets, you want to keep that separate, but still have access to publicly available information, and transacting with them on a blockchain system that goes between the two levels of access is crucial. So I'm starting to piece together some of the ways that the BMM assesses some of these trigger points, some of these points of ingress and egress, and validates whether or not the solution in question is mature to do the work that it proposes it wants to do.
Yes.
Correct.
I mean, you know, you talk about health, wealth, and happiness. This is the healthcare call, right? Health, wealth, and happiness. That means peace. It means compassion. It means love. It means a lot of different things. It means defense. It means many different areas when you talk about healthcare of civilians, and which is the purpose of government. So that's where I'm going with that. Level one, level two, and getting into those details of a hybrid.
Yeah.
So thank you, Gerard, for the time. I'm going to go mute.
Yeah, and the key is what the model is expecting is that you think through all these things and that you have a plan to do it, right? And this is where I think the assessment methodology is really important. An assessment in the context of it is not like a test, right? Think of it as somebody who's doing karate, right? You got a karate instructor. I don't know what you call them. I never did karate, but I know people who did. And so your instructor, your
Karate
sensei. Yes, so your sensei is teaching you, he's coaching you, he's trying to help you get up to that next belt. But at a certain point, he sits on the other side of a table with a couple other folks, and he's got to assess you, right? And you have to meet criteria in order to get to that next belt. That's how this assessment is really designed. It's really designed to be a solution improvement process. So, and it's not done by an individual, it's done by a team, right? So there's a planning phase, right, where it's all scoped out. Then the organization does their own self-assessment, given tools to do that. Then there's an assessment team review of that self-assessment. We then come together and do what's referred to as an appraisal conference, where the members of the assessment team and the members of the organization work together, right, to kind of move through that process. And once that criteria is established, then there's a rating, and the findings are delivered. The findings include both strengths and weaknesses, or strength and improvement opportunities. And then the organization can take that input and then start to plan further improvements. Now, an assessment is conducted by an assessment team, right? And there's some requirements, assessment life cycle. There are some requirements of that assessment team. Let me see if I have it right here. Yep. This is still the results. So let me just kind of, I can find it here in the document in just a second. Planning, submission.
Thank you, by the way. I'm grateful that you'll do this for the question.
Well, it's really super important.
Yeah,
So
and
why-
you know, while you're looking for the next piece that you want to talk on, Zach, thanks again for dropping some more resource nuggets in the chat.
Absolutely.
And you know, because this is one of the things that we really want to spur conversation about thinking about these things. Blockchain as a technology is still so new. Well, the underlying components of it is not new. We're talking about cryptography. We're talking about peer-to-peer networking, right? We're talking about some of those things that have been associated in computing for decades, but we're using them in different ways now in this one package. And nobody knows everything, right? It's one of the things that the GBA has, in my time serving as the healthcare working group lead and working to create guidance, it's like what Gerard said. It's giving people questions to ask themselves about their use case, about why this technology is interesting or important to them, to make sure there's a right fit. And so the key components of this maturity model assessment plan seem to be right on in creating the guidance or creating the points that need to be assessed, and helping an entity that's creating a system or an organization that's looking to vet out systems, give them the tools to really validate whether or not the blockchain solution in question is appropriate for their case.
Yeah, and so let me walk through the qualifications for an assessment team. So the assessment team is led by a qualified GBA lead assessor. At least one member of the team has developed or implemented a blockchain solution in the past. The team must include at least one member with experience in the following topics. So somebody's got to be an expert in blockchain technology, blockchain related legal and compliance issues, tokenomics, and at least 4 years of experience in the relevant industry. The team shall have a minimum of 4 members, and it can include somebody internal to the organization, but not more than 1/3 of the team membership can be from inside the organization. For an assessment team member, they must have completed the foundations course, the BMM course, and an assessment team member course. They've got to sign and comply with the GBA published code of conduct and sign and comply with the GBA assessment agreement that addresses conflicts of interest, confidentiality, non-disclosure, and intellectual property protection.
Hey, Gerard, I wanted to interject a question. I don't want to throw you too deep of a curveball, but if you go up a little bit, I wanted you to disambiguate what the definition of tokenomics is in this context. Are you talking about the digitization of assets and how those assets are governed in the ecosystem, or is there some other description that you're using when that's a requirement of an assessor to be adept at tokenomics?
It really is all about incentives, right? So for example, for any solution, the participants of the network have to have some incentives for participating. And what are those incentives? And so it includes the digitization of assets, and it also includes how those assets potentially are used to incentivize the right behavior.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah, and it's actually much more akin to economics, right? But it's essentially economics using any kind of a digital asset. So the assessment team leader, again, you can read it. Nobody's probably going to go from this call straight to an assessment team leader, but there, the expectation is significantly higher for an assessment team leader. And then domain experts, right? So members of the appraisal team must be considered a domain expert if they meet the following criteria. Now, this is where the ask is going to be from the healthcare working group, right? Is because right now we've got to keep this relatively vague and generic, but we'd love for the healthcare working group to help us define specifically for healthcare what that should be. but successful completion of a GBA foundations and VMM course in the related domain, right? So we have a healthcare course. I don't know if that healthcare course is the right course yet. We'll review that in a minute. And experience and resume review and approval of the Director of Standards and Certification and Lead Assessor. So if we do a resume review, what is it we're looking for, right? So if somebody's going to participate in a healthcare assessment, and we're saying we need at least one person to be a domain expert, how do we know when we got it, you know? So
yeah,
yeah, go
and
ahead.
just to put this in the context of healthcare, I think domain expertise would also be defined as where in healthcare specifically, because that's what we're talking about, where viable use case has already been demonstrated and is of interest to people in healthcare. So, for example, in pharmaceutical distribution, right? It's a critical component of healthcare service delivery that is in desperate need of some of the improvements that blockchain has shown it can provide for supply chain management, et cetera. And so somebody who has domain expertise in pharmaceutical production and supply chain would be, that would be a type of expertise in healthcare that would be useful to create guidance around. Another thing that kind of comes to mind is in service delivery. And so Clinical Squared has recently entered into a wonderful partnership with SolveCare, and SolveCare executes on service delivery workflows using blockchain solutions as the security and the auditability mechanism, but having an understanding of how services are delivered to a patient from the time that they've got a cough or they have an illness or they have an injury and they have to go to their insurance company and get pre-approval or pre-authorization to go see a specific doctor, to presenting to the physician's office and providing your information, to providing your health information in the form of a history and physical, where they're taking your blood pressure and all that. So
Are you talking about
understanding,
workflows? You talking about the workflow first, the workflow process of healthcare and insurance payments to make sure everything's approved. Is that correct?
yeah, and I was just kind of, so to that point, Mark, I was just kind of putting that out as a domain in healthcare where expertise would be valuable in assessing blockchain solutions that provide those kinds of features, for example. And that's how I came
That's
about.
so great to hear.
Marquis, let me jump in because I want to come right back to what you're saying. Before I do, we do have a healthcare course, right? And so, so one of the things that we can do is we can say, hey, if you take this healthcare course, then you're qualified. But I need this group to look at this healthcare course and say, you know, is that true? But let me show you how some of the other working groups are defining the expectations for their domain, right?
Yeah.
So we've got two things. We've really got three things. One thing that we got to figure out is what's the criteria for an assessor that's going to be doing a healthcare assessment. B, what do we want to be involved in the training? And then C, what expectations do we have on a healthcare system, right? So let me show you how some of the other working groups are dealing with, right? So here's one of them. So the banking and finance working group, they're working on their, let me see if I can make this bigger. They're working on their VMM supplement. And so what they've identified is there's different financial services use cases and different activities. Now this is still very early draft. So this is an early draft. And what they're attempting to do is, depending on what you're doing, right, there may be different expectations. And then think up here, they're putting in specifically what those different things are. So this is still an early draft, but this is and we don't have a standard methodology yet. But the different working groups are putting their stuff together, and we'll eventually identify sort of a best practice. But if you look at the voting working group, let's see if I can find voting. Here we go. This is how the voting working group is doing it. Let's see if I can get up here. So they said, hey, listen, in an election process, there's all of these different things that happen, right? Now, you might have one company or one solution that's really taking care of voter eligibility and registration, but you might have another company that's doing market return ballots. So depending on which of these functions you're doing, there would be a different set of expectations. And if we want to scroll down to what they're developing, let me just come up with, the solution shall record the following information on an immutable ledger, and then did evidence of the questions and contests and meet legal and regulatory requirements. So they're identifying for each phase what the solution needs to do. And they just started building out a data dictionary of what kind of data needs to be put back and forth. So all of the working groups are in very, very early stages right now of trying, not all, some of them are in very early stages trying to figure out what is it that should be a standard for a blockchain solution that's specifically doing this type of work.
Yeah, yeah. And to take that back into the context of healthcare, since there's so much regulation and so much compliance that some of it doesn't even cross into other aspects of service delivery. So I had mentioned pharmaceutical production and supply chain availability has its own kind of compliance requirements with the FDA, with different safety organizations and entities. But when you're talking about using healthcare data from a person, and that falls under Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, there are a whole different slew of requirements that need to be adhered to. And so when you're using a blockchain, where, to the point that you made earlier, Gerard, the information is, for all intents and purposes, immutable. There's little room for error in putting data in. And so allowances or checks or contingencies need to be kind of created within the solution to allot for error handling, or for the wayward onboarding of data that's just garbage. These things have to be taken into account within the confines of that execution of service, or that execution of I don't even know how another good way to put it, but I think you guys kind of take my meaning. Healthcare is so nuanced and so complex. I think even more so than finance in a lot of ways. And finance is one of the most complex flows of service that there is. So this is also a treatise to solicit assistance from those of you in the healthcare space, those of you that are GBA members, to join the healthcare working group, help us create some guidance around this blockchain maturity model that is directly applicable to things in the healthcare milieu. Mark Luther, I know that you come from the payer side, from the insurance claims adjudication side. And that is a huge kerfuffle of all of the points that have to be checked, all the boxes that have to be checked, right? There's so much space for fraud, for waste, for abuse in that sector alone, that it takes a domain expertise like what you have, not to toot your own horn, but my friend, I'm always gonna tout you up when I can. But somebody like you that has that domain expertise of how claims are adjudicated, how.
Well, It's also about the
Hey, guys,
reducing.
can I pause for a second? Because there's a million different rabbit. And by the way, Mark, Mark, I toot your horn. I toot your horn also because I'm super impressed with you, Marquis, and I think we can officially say are tutors. But what I'd like to do is, if we could, in the duration of this call, solicit from you guys, what should be the qualifications if somebody is going to participate on a BMM assessment as an assessment team member in a healthcare context or environment? What is the knowledge or skills? What's the KSAs that they need to be aware of, or at least mindful of, to be able to effectively assess a blockchain solution in the healthcare space? If we could,
Consumer
just come up with a
provider
list.
carrier, consumer provider insurance carrier. Okay, you can be in the insurance space. You can be in the insurance space, but to know that 28 to 30% of insurance provider overhead on the healthcare side for the provider, 28 to 30% is billing and coding overhead. How do you reduce that to reduce insurance costs? To understand the 40 billion plus in insurance fraud a year on the insurance side, to reduce costs on when you talk about loss ratios, to understand that is on the insurance carrier side. So they might use AI to solve and flag stuff, but then you have the consumer side to understand immediate claims adjudication and the importance of that. So insurance, carrier, provider, consumer, you got to be able to look at it from all three of those. It's the trilemma of the healthcare cost problem.
Hey, Mark, can I ask you, and Marky, what do you think? If we did a session on that topic, we could essentially record it, and then we could build that into the body of knowledge.
Yeah, I think the point that, and absolutely, I think that's the right way to move on this. But what Mark was saying really kind of encapsulates it. There are three, there's a triad in healthcare that is acknowledged as the three movers of policy, of adoption of technology, of service delivery, and that's physicians, payers, and people or patients. And so there are a zillion workflows, figuratively speaking, and each one of those kind of tracks that needs to be assessed. So and some of the services in a healthcare organization intersect between all of them, from health information management to supply chain management to service delivery and so forth. I think he really kind of encapsulated what kinds of expertise, what kinds of domain knowledge is really useful to kind of beef up the guidance that the BMM can offer for healthcare organizations.
So the other thing that I think might be unique to healthcare is data privacy. Right? There are specific data privacy expectations and requirements in healthcare. Agreed?
And based on what country you're in and what type of healthcare system. If it's the US, HIPAA, high tech, so on and so forth, right? Other countries might be something different. So
even what state?
What state you're in is different. And thankfully and unthankfully, the US is very fractured with 50 different DOIs and not really a centralized. That's the one thing about the US, is a very decentralized healthcare when it comes to the departments of insurance. So get it.
Mark, let me ask you this. For the topic of data privacy, if you were going to write a criteria, right, of knowledge and skills that somebody needs to have with regard to data privacy, how would you encapsulate that into a criteria?
Simply put, a toggle button that gives me the right to choose who I give it to. And if I want to use their services, I give them the right. If I don't want to use it, I don't give them the right.
That's not my question. That's not my question. If you were going to describe the criteria for an assessment team member to participate on an assessment of a healthcare solution, what would you want that assessment team member to know about data privacy?
Primarily, I'll start with just HIPAA and high tech to begin with.
Yeah.
Like a deep knowledge.
HIPAA, high tech.
I'll start there. I'll just start there and be quiet. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would also say the California Consumer Protection Act is one that kind of butts in where HIPAA and high tech kind of stopped. And the CCPA is the closest thing. And I think there are a couple of other states that have adopted similar policies, but it's the policy in the United States that's closest to GDPR.
Correct. For Europe, absolutely.
Europe,
you know,
right.
US, you got to go to the strictest model. If you're in the US, go to the strictest state model. I mean, HIPAA, high tech, and healthcare, I would always go to the strictest model of privacy laws. Teach to that.
Right. So insofar as, Gerard, to answer your question, finding assessors who are appropriate for the task of creating guidance for a blockchain maturity model in healthcare, doing it kind of like what Mark was saying, going from who has knowledge of the most restrictive regulatory and compliance requirements, the most confined processes, the most rigid processes in healthcare, and then expand beyond that. But finding people that have domain expertise in all of the different levels is important. You're going to want to have people who, beyond HIPAA and high tech and how organizations are supposed to interact with patient data, with protected health information, and the man in the moon, revenue cycle management, which is how a hospital, a healthcare organization makes their money, is probably more crucial to the majority of organizations out there than even adhering. And I'm not saying that adhering to HIPAA compliance and the rest is not important, but if an organization can't bolster its revenue generation, but if it's trying to use these solutions to do something like that for, say, contract acquisition or vendor relationships or something of that nature, for billing, and that ties into the payer side of the house, then you're only giving one side of the coin. So I think the effort to solicit people who have broad experience in healthcare and all of the different pieces that are important.
All right,
It's gonna take a little bit of time.
Marky, you're saying a lot of stuff, right? Somehow I got to translate all this stuff into criteria, right?
Oh, well, listen, and you don't have to. The great thing about this is we've got it recorded. We don't have to stop the show so that you can write stuff down. And then you have me and people like Mark and William and Adante that are members of the GBA, where we can have one-off conversations. We can have a more detailed discussion. You don't have to keep any of this in your mind, but I want to have this flow of conversation continue. If you have questions about it, let's continue to go through them.
Can I ask at the next working group meeting that you guys come up with essentially a page, right, of if you're going to assess a healthcare solution, here's what you have to know.
Sure.
Right. Because from that, we can then go back to our course and make sure that the course has the right content in it. And then from there, we can define a test and we can define criteria, because we want to make sure that if somebody's going to participate on a healthcare assessment as the healthcare domain expert, right, then they've got to meet certain criteria for knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah, and we can come up with.
I agree 100% on that, by the way. I mean, you talk about healthcare, it's like, do you understand WHO, the ICDs, the International Classification of Diseases? Do you understand CPT, at least in the US, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of things you got to understand. And when you talk about writing digital smart contracts for immediate claims adjudication around the WHO ICDs and who's got copyright laws and everything else and the laws that go with that, it becomes a complicated scenario. So you
Yeah.
got to be able to work through that and understand it for sure.
And it's not even so much that they have to be intimate with it, but they have to at least know what the issues are so they can go look it up.
Exactly. Exactly.
Zach's got his hands up.
Yeah, would now be the time to suggest something like for criteria on the technical level? I know you guys have been talking about from the medical and medical application side.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's really important for an auditor or an evaluator to understand and have been working with the specific underlying technology for the blockchain. And there are two different types fundamentally. Bitcoin uses a UTXO model, unspent transaction output, which creates some limitations, but also a number of huge benefits over the account-based model, which is Ethereum, where I think most people are working today. But given the expressiveness of the UTXO model and the pervasiveness of how many new chains are coming out, building on top of that, now that we have some scalable versions, including Bitcoin Cash and some other derivations, I think it's really important that if the project is UTXO based, that there's somebody who's been working with the UTXO based chain doing the evaluation, and the same for account based, because the nuances and where the faults lie really don't translate as well across those different models.
Yeah, and Zach brings up a really good point. So there's a technical at the code level component to what these assessments should be able to yield as far as telling people how mature the solution is. And then there's a technical piece for the workflow, for the process, for the use case that is being applied to. I think Zach brings up some really good points. So within the context of that, Gerard, where do the assessment points fall for things like what Zach was sharing, or the consensus mechanism, the node distribution, the underlying code that's being used, the etc. Where does that fall into the BMM model?
Well, what's interesting is that we don't deal specifically with the UTXO methodology, I guess you'd call it. We do have a requirement in the assessment that somebody has to have be a technical expert, right? And we're actually right now reviewing that training material. We deal with how Bitcoin deals with. We definitely deal with the different sort of mechanisms. But Zach, you said something that really kind of caught my attention, and in my head I'm trying to figure out how to process it. You said that there's typically different things that fall along the fault lines of that. And one thing that we don't address is what those things typically are. We identify the difference between account-based and unspent transaction output, but we haven't identified sort of typical things to look out for in those two different models. I mean, we do deal with issue of double spend. So Zach, what you said really intrigues me, and I'm trying to get my head around it, but I don't have a response for you yet.
Oh, it's perfectly acceptable. It really does kind of melt your mind, right, when you realize that so much of this stuff that we imagine being so similar is actually greatly different, even though the way you interact with it is nearly identical. But I'm happy to further that conversation with you offline rather than make you try to struggle to, go on a brain hike on a tangent through this call.
Yeah.
Zach, let me ask you a question. What's your background, or sorry, your area of expertise? Because I can plug you into a couple of different places, but I want to get you plugged.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm a software engineer for 20 years. If I'm being honest, I was in college. I wanted to be a doctor, but in my third year of college, I dropped out because I couldn't see myself going to another 5 years of school and became a programmer. self-taught programmer, but as soon as I sold my first business, I went to work for a small boutique firm under the individual I chose to be my mentor. I got to work on great projects for like PricewaterhouseCoopers, Hilton Hotels, NASCAR, and the like. Ended up becoming a senior engineer at Citrix Systems. Been an entrepreneur ever since, and I fell into the blockchain around 2016, 2017, really, building on Ethereum, and have just kind of progressed from Ethereum to other chains since then.
Got it. And Zach, are you a GBA member?
I am not yet. I was actually introduced to GBA in this meeting first from one of my team members, Andy Chalanik, who may or may not have attended previously.
Come on,
and Andy's a good dude. I just had
Come on
lunch with him
board.
last week. Yeah.
come on board. It's
Yeah,
fun.
Andy's a great dude. I'm loving this
Fun.
conversation. I can definitely see us being a part of a member of the group.
Right on.
I've got an architecture working group that I'm looking to find high quality folks to participate in to actually build out some of the technical stuff. I'd love to. If you wanted,
Yeah,
to be a part
I'm
of-
absolutely happy to have that conversation. I shared my LinkedIn here. I'll actually, I don't mind sharing with all of you my stupid marketing email. You know, when you're a startup, you make these kind of decisions sometimes.
What languages? If you don't mind me asking, what languages?
So I write currently in JavaScript mostly because I am pretty much a sole developer developing for the blockchain and the web application side of things. So I'm just trying to make it easy. You know, there's more JS libraries out there than any other in the world, but I started my career in C#, actually with C++, but C#. I've worked on iOS projects. My heart really lies in Ruby on Rails, but I'm professionally in JavaScript right now.
Yeah,
Thank
Ruby on Rails has a lot of extensibility. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So I'm a fan of it too. But
Rust
sounds like-
experience?
what was that, Mark?
Yeah, any Rust experience?
I don't have much Rust experience, but if we're looking for people with Rust, I could suggest my friend Luke, who just built a product called Bucks, which is a UTXO management service that's provided kind of like SaaS. And he is like a Rust, I don't want to say expert, but like evangelist is how I'll put that. So I have a deep reach in the developer community here in Miami. So basically, if there's some type of technology you want to ask about, like I know somebody that can help you.
Yeah, that's what's up. Mark, definitely get Zach's LinkedIn information from the chat. And anybody that wants to connect that's not already connected, I think I'm connected with everybody here on this call, but feel free to drop. And I think, Aaron, we should have said at the outset, encouraging people to drop their LinkedIn in the chat so that we can all connect and collaborate and communicate. Okay. So we've covered a lot about the blockchain maturity model, and I think Gerard, you've done a fine job in kind of expressing why it's important at this stage in the innovations kind of life cycle, right? We just had the person on from Deloitte. I've talked to people in government contracting that say that the government is coming up with all kinds of reasons to be interested in blockchain technology, and it's not just for FOMO, but because of ACT-IAC, one of the groups that I had mentioned before, has created a national use case systems library that details all of the blockchain solutions that the government has employed successfully. So the government is starting to get, they're starting to take notice and say that blockchain is something that they want to learn more about. But one thing that we haven't talked about, Gerard, is the value of the blockchain maturity model for new solutions. So, I run a startup. Zach, you're part of that startup life. Adante, William, we're all part of organizations, I think, that are creating solutions that we want to get public adoption for. Gerard, can you explain some of what we imagine a blockchain maturity model certification from the GBA would garner for a solution developer?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I just want to share one other thing. One of the things that we are in the process of doing, and William's aware of this, is we're trying to showcase GBA member solutions. And so in all of our training, we're going to have modules that describe different use cases, how blockchain is being used in the healthcare space, in a different space. And what we're asking our members to do is to give us some information, whether it's a slide, whether it's a video, something like that, so that in our training, we can then start highlighting and showcasing our members who are using blockchain in different ways. And as we started building that, we thought, you know what, we ought to turn these into clips and put these clips on our YouTube channel, right? And and essentially socialize them. So we let people all around the world know. And in fact, if we organize and categorize them, hey, if you're interested in finding out about blockchain solutions in the healthcare space, in the clinical trials, in the insurance payments and whatever, they'll be able to come to a place and see sort of this library of information about GBA members that are solving different problems. So
Gerard, I think you're going to have your own TikTok soon, and have each use case have its own TikTok.
Yeah.
With a dance challenge associated.
And you know what? Honestly,
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. So I think what we ought to do then is ask each GBA member to create their own TikTok, right? And then we can essentially just have a directory of blockchain use cases all in TikTok.
Beautiful. When do you need that by? Do you have a deadline for when you're collecting those videos or audio?
We're in the process of looking at launching our training solution by the end of the month. So we're sorry guys, this is a little off topic, but we're setting up technology that each of our working groups can create training. It'll be connected to a payment page so people can pay for training. They can take the course, they can take the test, they can get the certification and push that up on social media. So all of our working groups will have an opportunity to generate revenue for their working groups.
Is the certification on blockchain? And if not, can my solution help to do that?
Well, absolutely. So what I need
Hell
to do
yeah.
in addition to the joining the architecture working group, then I need you to join the education curriculum development working group or the education technology working group.
Wonderful. We have two delineated applications that are, I don't know, 80% the same, right, between healthcare, because we started in COVID. So the record set was absolutely minuscule and lined up very well to sort of a pass or fail on a grade or a yes or no on a degree. But we're moving into trade schools, coding boot camps, and anything that needs a cert should be on blockchain.
Amen, brother. Amen. Yeah. So once you join, go gbaglobal.org/membership, and then once you join, it's got to get approved by the admin. Under association, go to working groups, find all the working groups that apply, and Jiminy Crickets, man, we got a lot to talk about.
Cool.
Yeah, we do.
All right. So to answer your question, Marquis, first of all, it's a little tougher to get a certification than we initially thought, because the thing, and I mentioned this before, that we noticed about almost all these solutions is they came up with a great idea. They put together marketing materials. They got investors, right? They got some revenue. They started coding, and they haven't really defined a lot of things that they need to be able to survive, transferring personnel. Because if you got a blockchain solution and it's completely dependent on somebody, and that person leaves, then quite frankly, you're not mature enough to get a rating,
Yep.
right?
Right.
And it's amazing how poorly documented a lot of these solutions are. So it's going to probably take a little while for those first certifications to come out there. We are in the process of training people and really sort of socializing the model. So the model is getting a lot of enthusiasm, but it's going to take a little time, I think. We do anticipate our first certification to be posted in the next maybe 2 or 3 months. And then after that, it's going to probably trickle until it waterfalls. But to be listed on the GBA site, an internationally recognized government blockchain association, as having credibility, right? That the value of that is going to grow over time. right? I mean, initially on day one, it's going to be like, well, who's the GBA? But as we continue going down the path, that value proposition will grow over time. And the more certifications we get on there, then of course, the more FOMO there's going to be for not being on there. So it's going to be a journey. It's not going to happen on a single day.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, in the case where, just to kind of pull on that thread from the solution developer side, say that, I'm creating something and I really see the value in being ratified by the GBA BMM. Say I go through the process and there are big holes in the technology where it needs to be hard, that needs to do more work. We need to do more work on it to be considered a mature solution. Do you have any idea of what the model is going to be to have organizations go through an assessment, maybe come away with some action items that need to be shored up, and then get reassessed? Is that part of the cycle that you envision, or how do you see this kind of executed?
Yeah. Well, in part, we're figuring that out in these first couple of assessments that we're doing. We are currently building a set of tools. So, for example, as we look at the expectations, the first guy that we worked with, he said, okay, well, I'll just write this stuff up. And he created this one, he said, I'll write it up in this charter document. And then he just started throwing everything into this one document. And I was just like, dude, this isn't going to work. I mean, you can't write this to pass the assessment. Then after the assessment, it's totally unusable, right? You need to organize information in ways that make sense, right? So you probably need some place to collect your requirements, right? And for people to submit the requirements, for them to be evaluated and determined and then communicated. It's like, it could be a requirements document, it could be a ticketing system, right? It could be any mechanism you want, but you can't just throw everything in one place. You probably need a place where your testers know what test scripts to execute, right? And you just, and you probably need something to communicate to your software developers that, hey, here's the architecture, here's the unit specs. You just can't throw everything into one document to pass an assessment, right? Because it's just not going to survive. So we're now building out tools, templates, examples, right? And we're working with different companies, and we're saying, well, all right, well, how do you do it, right? And this could be a best practice for other folks to do it. So in the process, I would say we're learning about how to best take those expectations from the model and translate it into really useful, beneficial solutions. And then we're going to make that available to GBA members so that they can then offer those solutions to their clients.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, we've got a session tomorrow where we're actually starting to build out the first solution. So, it is a journey for all of us. But I got to say, we're all learning a lot. There's incredible information sharing as part of this. People are making great network connections. It's just been a great experience.
Yeah, and I had heard scuttlebutt that creating a maturity model is becoming important for other folks out in the tech space. And so the fact that the GBA is leading the way with identifying what makes a blockchain solution mature, and then really kind of defining what those maturity points are in real terms that technologists or process wonks or compliance wonks can understand. I think this is going to be a really useful tool to increase adoption and make people feel more confident in the technology. There's so much noise, as I think everybody here on this call knows. There's so much noise out in pop culture and on the news wires about what blockchain is and what it ain't, and how it's valuable and how it's not valuable, and on and on. So having these disambiguation points for the folks that are serious in the space, that are really trying to make an impact on the economy, on industry, on people's lives, on how they they transact with data, commoditize it, secure it, etc. I think this is one of the reasons why, and Zach, this is kind of for you too. This is one of the reasons why I joined the GBA years ago, and I've seen so much value in my participation. Having an organization like this with the membership that it has, the footprint in 100+ countries around the world, and knowing that we're all trying to drive this technology to some good place is encouraging. It's encouraging to me that we can solve a lot of problems with this stuff.
I quite literally end every stand-up meeting, every morning stand-up, with an instruction to let's go do some good in the world.
Right on.
That's how I close.
Yeah, I've got a friend named Samson who I laugh at him because when he talks about some of the challenges, some of the problems that he encounters, and he has these mental conversations with himself about how he wants to attack the problem or address the problem. He starts out with, well, I woke up with the intention of being awesome today, so this is what I'm gonna do. And I'm like, that's such a great personal mantra, right? And from a company perspective, from just a humanist perspective, let's go out there and be awesome with the talents, with the skills, with the expertise that we've all kind of created for ourselves, and put it to good use.
Hey,
Marquis? Yes, sir.
Listen, I think we covered all the ground we were planning on covering. So
Yeah.
if it's okay with you, I'll drop, and I think we can call it a good meeting, and I'm looking forward to connecting with some of these folks.
Yeah, and Gerard, I think that you've and I've connected with Zach. Adante works with us over at Clinical Squared. Aaron is one of the frontispieces over at Burst IQ. Jorge's a GBA member. So I think we're all among friends. We can kind of wind it down unless there's anything else that anybody wants to jump off mute really quick and mention. I think we could call this a successful open discussion about the GBA's blockchain maturity model. Any last comments from anybody? If not, then I second that motion, Gerard. We can call this a meeting, and I look forward to seeing everybody third Thursday of September.